The Enchanted April. It all began in a women's club in London on a cold February afternoon. The club was uncomfortable and the afternoon was miserable. Mrs. Wilkins had come down from Hampstead to do some shopping. She had eaten lunch at the club and was now sitting in the smoking room, feeling tired and dull. She picked up the Times from the table and let her eyes move slowly down the page, without much interest. Then she saw an advertisement in the agony column. To those who appreciate wisteria and sunshine, small medieval Italian castle on the shores of the Mediterranean to be let furnished for the month of April. Necessary staff remain. Mrs. Wilkins read it once, then again, and yet she did not really understand what had happened to her. The truth was that at that exact moment her April had been decided. She just didn't know it yet. She dropped the newspaper with a small gesture of resignation, walked over to the window and looked out at the wet street. Rain was falling steadily on the umbrellas and the dirty buses below. Medieval castles were not for her, nor April on the Mediterranean, nor sunshine, nor wisteria. Those pleasures belonged to rich people, and Mrs. Wilkins wasn't rich. She did appreciate such things, deeply, secretly, but she had never spoken of them. In the whole world she owned only £90, saved carefully over many years from her clothes allowance. Her husband, a solicitor called Mr. Wilkins, or Mellarsh as she called him, had encouraged her to save it for a rainy day. Looking at the rain outside, Mrs. Wilkins suddenly wondered if this was the rainy day her husband had meant. Was it possible that this little castle in Italy was exactly what her savings were for? The idea seemed ridiculous. She turned away from the window and prepared to put on her coat and go shopping. She needed to buy soles for Mellarsh's dinner. He liked only soles, except for salmon. But as she crossed the room, she noticed another woman sitting at the central table, reading the Times very intently. It was Mrs. Arbuthnot. Mrs. Wilkins knew her only by sight. They both lived in Hampstead and belonged to the same club, and Mrs. Wilkins often saw her in church on Sundays. Mrs. Arbuthnot worked with the poor and ran the Sunday school. She looked serious and sad, but also capable and organized. Mrs. Wilkins hesitated. She had never spoken to her before. She was shy, and speaking didn't come easily to her. But she could not stop herself from thinking that Mrs. Arbuthnot was reading the same advertisement. Mrs. Arbuthnot's eyes were fixed on the spot on the page. She was not really reading anymore. She was dreaming. Mrs. Wilkins stood there for a moment, then found herself leaning across the table. "Are you reading about the medieval castle and the wisteria?" she heard herself ask. Mrs. Arbuthnot looked up, surprised. She studied Mrs. Wilkins in silence. "Yes," she said at last. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, only because I saw it too," said Mrs. Wilkins, blushing deeply. And it seems so wonderful, especially on a day like this." "Yes," said Mrs. Arbuthnot softly, "wonderful." For a moment they sat there, caught by the same thought. Light, warmth, colour, the sea, so different from Hampstead, from rain, from routine, from duty. Then Mrs. Wilkins spoke again, quickly, as if afraid she might stop. "Why don't we try to get it?" Mrs. Arbuthnot stared at her. "Get it?" "Yes, rent it, share it, you and I." "But we don't even know each other," said Mrs. Arbuthnot. "But we would," said Mrs. Wilkins eagerly. "In a month we would know each other very well, and it would be only for a month." Mrs. Arbuthnot felt herself strangely shaken. She had lived for years guided by four steady things: God, husband, home, duty. She had not allowed herself dreams, and yet the idea stirred her. It would be very beautiful, she said carefully, but one mustn't waste time on impossible things. Oh, but thinking of them matters, said Mrs. Wilkins, and sometimes I really believe this. If one thinks hard enough, one gets them. Mrs. Arbuthnot looked at her with concern and kindness. You seem tired, she said gently. Perhaps you have been doing too much for others. I've done nothing but duties, said Mrs. Wilkins suddenly, her voice trembling, and I don't believe anyone loves me any more for it, and I long for something else. She stopped, ashamed, and smiled apologetically. It's the advertisement, said Mrs. Arbuthnot gravely. Yes, said Mrs. Wilkins, dabbing her eyes, and us both being so miserable. They sat together in silence, two women who had never spoken before, yet somehow understood each other, while outside the rain continued to fall on London. And somewhere, 2 months ahead, a medieval castle on the Mediterranean coast was already waiting for them. This was a retelling of the first chapter of Elizabeth von Arnim's novel The Enchanted April. It was first published in 1922. And now let's have a look at some useful vocabulary you can take away from the story. She let her eyes move slowly down the page. If you let your eyes move slowly down the page, you read without much focus or strong interest. Example: he let his eyes move slowly down the email, too tired to concentrate properly. With a small gesture of resignation. If someone makes a gesture of resignation, they show they are unwillingly accepting the situation they can't easily change. Example: he received the news with a gesture of resignation. For a rainy day. If you save something for a rainy day, you keep it for a difficult time in the future. Example: she always puts a little money aside for a rainy day. Mrs. Wilkins knew her only by sight. If you know someone only by sight, you recognize their face but have never spoken to them. Example: I know her only by sight. We've never actually met. Speaking did not come easily to her. If something doesn't come easily to you, you find it difficult to do. For example, public speaking doesn't come easily to most people. She couldn't stop herself from thinking. If someone can't stop themselves from doing something, they are unable to resist it. For example, she couldn't stop herself from laughing. Caught by the same thought. If two people are caught by the same thought, they suddenly find themselves thinking the same thing. Example: they looked at each other, caught by the same thought. I long for something else. If you long for something, you strongly and deeply desire it. Example: she longed for a change in her life. And before we finish, here are a couple of questions to make you think about the story, and perhaps about yourself too. Have you ever read or seen something small, like an advertisement, a photo, a message, that unexpectedly stayed in your mind? Why do you think it affected you? If you decided to escape somewhere for 1 month, where would you go? And what would you hope to find there? That's the end of today's story. The Enchanted April. I hope you enjoyed this quiet beginning of a lovely spring read and that some of the words and expressions will stay with you, whether you're walking in the rain, going about your daily routine, or dreaming of somewhere warmer. Until next time, happy listening!